What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another preview / prediction video, and man, it is here. It is that time. It's the home opener. It's Ford Field. It's a lot of blue masks, I guess. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, man, we are back with another prediction video. I'm still hoping to nail a score prediction. Last week I think we were in the ballpark, all right? We weren't right, but we were in the ballpark. We were kind of in a right range, so I feel like we kind of dialed it in, and this week we're going to hit the exact right score prediction, so stay tuned for that at the end of the video when I give you my score prediction. And I do plan on hopefully getting more straight to the point in this video. I feel like last week was pretty good, but just making the video a little bit shorter. I'm still trying to kind of dial these and condense them as best as possible, but there's still a lot of things that I want to touch on. I know that always happen, so usually they kind of get a little bit longer than I planned. But we're going to dive into both sides of the ball. Lions offense against that Seattle defense, and the flip side, Lions defense against that Seattle offense. I went back, of course, went through that week 1 game that they played against the LA Rams. We went through our game against the Chiefs, but I also had to dive back into the game that we played against Seattle last year, where they didn't punt. We did have a turnover in that game, so that was great on a punt, but we didn't force a punt. So I think that's step 1 for this week. Like, hey, let's do that first, and then we go from there. But I also look back even further. I'm talking 2021, Seattle against the Steelers, just to see Cam Sutton match up against DK Metcalf a little bit. So I feel good about this prediction. I really do. But, we'll see. All I really care about is the win, because then we can do really my favorite video, which is that post-game reaction where you're just fired up. The first thing that we have to start off with is the injury report. We have designations. It is Friday, but we don't have some of the confirmation in terms of which guys are questionable. Will they play or will they not play? Some of these guys I think we can guess on based on what we've heard throughout the week, but others that we just don't know, and they may end up as game time decisions. But we'll start with the players that we know are out for this week's game, and we'll start on the Seattle side, because one of these I think are massive. I mean, there's a couple on here that you could argue are huge, but one that I think is massive that may not get enough of the talk that I feel like it deserves is Jamal Adams, the safety, being listed as out with a knee injury. Now, Jamal Adams, they talked about him playing more of a linebacker role this upcoming season for Seattle, but he is once again out. And really, the reason I think this is massive is because I think this puts a guy like Julian Love on the field more often, like we saw last week. And I thought Julian Love was a guy that they had a lot of success going at in coverage, specifically in zone coverage. So I think it's massive for that reason alone. Julian Love is going to be on the field with Quandre Diggs, and I think that's huge because I think that's one of the players in this defense where they added some pieces that you can absolutely attack. So I think that's a massive loss. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, Charles Cross, who it sounds like he's improving, but the left tackle is going to be out for this week's game with a toe injury, which means that we're likely looking at 2 backup offensive tackles because Lucas was injured as well. He was placed on IR. Likely means that we're going to see the 2 backup offensive tackles, Curhan, I think that's how you say his name, at right tackle, and then at left tackle, Stone Forsythe at left tackle. And we did get to see them play some snaps in week 1. Now here at right tackle, you have Curhan wearing the number 74, and I hope I'm saying his name right. I thought you noticed a little bit linear in his pass protection, a little bit straight up. Both of these guys are really towers as backup offensive tackles. Some of the pass slides just to look a little bit tall, maybe not as natural to just naturally mirror some of these pass rushers, which could obviously lead to issues if they're forced in pass down situations. Did seem like they wanted to kind of jump set him a little bit, and I think he's actually a really solid run blocker, though we haven't seen it a ton, a guy that's pushing 330 pounds. On the flip side, you have Forsythe, another very tall offensive tackle who didn't look terrible in pass protection, being able to get his hands, some strength, but it did feel like some of the set into the block, giving up a little bit of a soft edge where he could kind of be pushed through the shoulder into the pocket. So look, Forsythe was a guy that was a 6th round pick coming out of 2021, and you have Curhan, who was not drafted in 2021. These are both 2 young players that they invested in some sense, maybe not a ton, but they invested in, and I don't think they look terrible at offensive tackle, but clearly it feels like an area where the Lions should be able to attack. But down your 2 starting offensive tackles is a very difficult loss. And we know on our side, it sounds like we're going to have a massive loss as well on the offensive line. So both offensive lines dealing with some injuries here. And for them on the interior, I think there's also question marks as well. They have Damian Lewis, who really struggled last week, but of course he saw a lot of Aaron Donald, so I think that's understandable. But those are 2 major losses for Seattle, as well as Mike Morris, the rookie defensive tackle or defensive end out of Michigan. And what's most interesting about that is a guy at his size playing a lot on the interior this last week against LA. I didn't know really where he would play. Playing on the interior, it kind of speaks to the size that they put inside. So we did get to see him a little bit last week. I thought there was some good in there for Mike Morris, but he's out this week. Questionable for Seattle is Boye Mafe, the second-year edge rusher. Definitely a crazy athlete on the edge, man, and he is a problem over there. They have some fantastic athletes playing that edge rusher position, standing up in kind of that 3-4 defense, as well as Devin Bush. And what's key about Devin Bush is you'll see him out there mainly in pass situations. This is where I kind of circle him, because I think he has a legitimate ability in man coverage as a linebacker, with Jordan Brooks, who can really move, and Bobby Wagner, who doesn't seem as comfortable in man coverage right now. Devin Bush looked pretty good against the LA Rams. So if they don't have him, that could be a key loss for, I think, certain situations. Although it does sound like Devin Witherspoon is going to be making his season debut for the Seattle Seahawks, the nickel cornerback. It sounds like that's where he's going to play, but I guess they could move it around a little bit. They do have Kobe Bryant, who played that position last week, and I thought he was a guy that really struggled. So it feels like it could be just a direct replacement. Like, hey, put in, our 5th pick in the draft. On the outside, we'll kind of lean with what we did last week. But even that, I think there's real questions, because last week, they came in with Trey Brown on the outside. But at a point there in the game, they ultimately put Michael Jackson in the game, who is a former Lion. He was around with us for a little bit. And of course, they have Reek Woolen on the other side. So I think there's legitimate questions at how they even aligned these guys. But if they do it as kind of I'm expecting, and they just put Witherspoon in for Kobe Bryant, I think that's a massive upgrade for them based on what I saw this past week against the Rams. On the Lions side, we'll start with the players that have been listed out. Khalil Dorsey with illness, which is, I think, a key in terms of depth, because we know he plays inside-outside. He seemed very, very solid in the preseason as a reliable backup outside cornerback. Hopefully, we don't need a guy like that. We didn't need him last week, so hopefully that's the case once again, as well as Emmanuel Mosley, who didn't play last week either with the knee/hamstring that he's returning from. And then also Josh Paschal, who popped in there today. Dan Campbell spoke to some of the depth that they have in terms of Romeo Okwara and Isaiah Buggs, talking about 2 players that last week were inactive, have healthy scratches for the Lions, that maybe both those guys or one of those guys could be activated this week as some depth without Josh Paschal, who kind of rotates in with John Kaminsky, as we saw in week 1. Doubtful, this one really hurts, man. It's Taylor Decker with an ankle injury. Sounds like this kind of popped up at the end of the game against the Chiefs, and now it sounds like he may not get to play. Now, Dan Campbell did talk about some of the arrangements that could take place this week on the offensive line without having Taylor Decker, but we know how big this is. I mean, look, there's not much I need to say. We know how big this is. We saw it firsthand for half of the season, so I'm just hoping that this isn't something that lingers around and that we can get him back as soon as possible. He didn't rule out Taylor Decker, but he said he's less than questionable, so I would assume that's why he's listed as doubtful. He didn't rule it out, but he said it's an outside shot that he plays. With that, what it could look like on the offensive line, it sounds like they have a couple of options. Kicking Big V out to the right tackle position from right guard, sliding in Graham Glasgow, and then kicking Penei Sewell, who's at right tackle, to left tackle, which is what he played coming out of college. Now, the interesting thing about that is in the past, a couple years ago, we had the opportunity to do that same thing. Now, maybe we didn't have the same backup interior lineman, you could argue, but we had the option to do that same thing, and we did not do that. We kept Big V in the inside, and we ultimately just put Matt Nelson in the game at tackle. So I don't know that they're going to do that, but it sounds like something that they are repping as a possibility. The other possibility that we heard, which was an interesting one, is Penei Sewell sticking at right tackle and them taking Big V and placing him at left tackle from the right guard position, and then again sticking in Graham Glasgow as the right guard to get the best 5 on the field, because Graham Glasgow is kind of like a starter. And then finally, the other option is Matt Nelson is absolutely still in the mix to start for the Lions in this game. We didn't have Taylor Decker. Penei Sewell would kick the left tackle. Matt Nelson would go in at right tackle. Maybe they just put Matt Nelson at left tackle. I don't think they would do that, but I guess they could do that. Or they just do what they did a couple of years ago and just let Matt Nelson start. The most interesting piece to this that I will say, and I'm not sure what they're going to do, is that Matt Nelson was useful for the Lions last time they played Seattle in terms of playing that 6th offensive lineman role. And I do think it could absolutely be useful once again this week when you talk about how they're going to attack this Seattle defense rushing the football. Having that 6th offensive lineman was beneficial for what they want to do schematically. So if they want to keep that option available, then obviously playing him at tackle wouldn't be the best way to go about it. So maybe it does take moving some pieces around so you can allow Matt Nelson to still be part of the offense just in that 6th offensive lineman role, which we know he is very useful specifically as a run blocker. So it's something to keep an eye on. So let's start with the Lions offensively against the Seattle defense and kind of what I expect in this game. Now, we saw in week 1 the LA Rams kind of got it going offensively there. there, 30-13. They had some good pass protection, and they had a lot of success passing the ball in this game. But I'll start with the run game first, because there were some things that I thought that LA did, which was a little bit different than some of our approach last year to Seattle, and I thought there were some similarities in terms of the way that we look to attack them on the ground as well. Now, they made some new additions to this defensive front specifically. Obviously, Bobby Wagner is a massive one. You talk about the way that he feels and the way that he reads defensively, the ability to play with his eyes but also move and fill lanes. Man, he is smooth as a run defender. They also have Jordan Brooks, which can absolutely fly. You talk about some of the outside rushing attack, the tosses, the way that he can fly from the backside and just run and scrape things down. Like, Jordan Brooks can absolutely move. Now, with that, on the defensive line, they also added some new additions like Draymond Jones, the 280-pound defensive tackle, as well as Jaron Reed, who's pushing 310 pounds, which I thought was one of the more consistent, impactful players when watching this last week's games against the Rams on that defensive line wearing the number 90. So they added some new additions because last season against the run, well, they were horrible. I mean, statistically speaking, 30th run defense, 4.9 yards per carry, 28th yards allowed after contact, over 2 yards allowed after contact, and 20th in run stop win rate. So they weren't very good defensively. They made that an emphasis to add to that. They also spoke on how schematically playing more split coverage looks defensively could have led to some, missed gap assignments against the run versus historically how they were a single high cover 3 type of team. But with more versatility last season, it could have led to some inefficiencies playing the run with how they wanted to fill the run with their safeties and with their back end also being involved in doing so. What I took away from watching that game, taking a look at how we attacked him and how other teams look to attack this team as well, I really do believe the Lions should have some real success, specifically on the interior, sealing some of these blocks. Now, last season what we saw for the Lions, we saw a lot of power rushing, we saw a lot of counter, a lot of pulling offensive linemen against this Seattle team, and they had some success with it. Jamal Williams, 108 yards, 19 carries. Craig Reynolds had 2 carries for 30 yards. We didn't have Swift in that game, but they had a ton of success running the football that way. Then you look at the LA Rams, who started to utilize some of that, power rushing scheme a little bit more, which in the past they've been just mainly a zone rushing team. They started to implement some of that, but I thought when they had some real success, it was attacking straight at them. It was inside zones. It was duo rushing, meaning that you double team block on an interior defensive tackle. It was those kind of runs, especially when they got inside the 10, where I thought they just had success moving, getting up to the second level with their offensive tackles, and specifically that tight end position, which I believe is going to be a key for run blocking in this game. So this is why I spoke on the Matt Nelson point, because whether it's Matt Nelson or whether it's a Sam Laporta or a Brock Wright, who, for example, we saw last year, the Lions put Brock Wright at fullback on an I formation look and ran a toss play with Brock Wright leading the way. We haven't seen that very often, but I think it spoke to how the Lions felt like they wanted to attack this team to put him in that spot. So whether it's the tight end, because this edge rusher position is legit for the Seattle Seahawks in the sense of they are extremely athletic. Boye Mafe would be a big addition for them if he can play this week. Nwosu, one of their edge rushers wearing the number 10, that is a guy that I circle. Maybe not dominant as a pass rusher, but man, can he stop the run and set a pretty good edge. So those are the guys that I really circle, because I do believe the interior of the Lions offensive line will have success against the interior of that defensive line. It's a lighter front that they usually play, which to me makes sense why the Lions felt like they could overpower it a little bit, seal off their blocks, kick some offensive linemen, and have some success breaking into the second level. That makes tons of sense to me. While at the same time, I think they could also have success with some zone rushing, but again, that could arguably be leaning into some of maybe what they do. Obviously, athletically speaking, we have some good athletes along the offensive line. I think we have a really good mix. It's why we're one of the most versatile rushing schemes, but you could argue with their defensive front that playing into that could play into their hands a little bit. So the Lions may go to what they did last year, but with the explosiveness that they have off the edge, I think you saw a guy like Matt Nelson, the way that they were able to utilize a 6th offensive lineman like a tight end without actually pulling a lineman out of a gap, but instead utilizing that 6th offensive lineman like a tight end to be a lead blocker, I thought was a very interesting wrinkle that we could absolutely see come back this week, especially if Matt Nelson is not starting at tackles. We saw the LA Rams utilize a lot of the jet fake motion, and then also off that, a quick pitch. Now, like I said, these linebackers can really flow, they can fly. These edge rushers get upfield quickly, and they can bring things down behind the line of scrimmage very often. If you don't block well with your tackles, if you're trying to get an outside run going, like that is going to be a key. So for us, I think the tight ends are going to be very valuable. You take a look at this Rams play where they're going into the end zone and they're trying to punch this in, and you circle the tight end on this play. His block down here on Derek Hall, and then the springboard up to the second level to pick up another block to ultimately ultimately allow this run to get into the end zone. That's where I think it's going to be key. And again, the Lions could choose to try to utilize an extra offensive lineman for some of those spots if that's how they're going to go about this. I thought it was very interesting to see when they wanted to get outside, utilizing that jet fake motion and then the quick pitch could give them some of those quick hitters to get to the edge successfully and hopefully have them kind of stuck inside for a second. And the way that the Lions did that with Brock Wright at fullback and using Matt Nelson between the tackles, one side to another, I thought was a little interesting wrinkle instead of just your, typical pulling offensive lineman, but to use him as a sixth offensive lineman, almost like a tight end, to kind of help springboard that type of run. I think the Lions will have success once again rushing the football in this game. I think it's a spot that they could really try to lean on in this game, especially if they can get the safeties to continuously roll down, get into the box. They utilize their defensive backs, whether that be Kobe Bryant, whoever that may be, their safeties. And obviously that's a big reason that Jamal Adams was kind of noted as like, oh, he's going to play linebacker this year, because those guys are asked to come down and play in run support. So they can flow fast. They have really aggressive upfield edge rushers that you can attack, but at the same time, it's very easy to miss those blocks, and it's very easy for a pulling offensive lineman, not necessarily on the backside when you're trying to steal, but on the front side following that pulling offensive lineman, for that lineman to get connected with whoever that edge rusher is on the edge. It's very difficult to get hands on those guys because they slippery and they slide by those and they cause tackles for loss. Should lead to a pretty good mix between Gibbs and Montgomery, especially with some of those jet looks that the Lions want to implement them like they did last week with Gibbs. They could get him on a lot of those fake looks or even give it to him a few times and then set up runs off of that. I think this would be a great opportunity to utilize something like that in this game. Really pull a guy like Bobby Wagner out of the box a little bit. Now, from the passing game matchups that I circled heading into this game from what I've seen from watching the Seattle Seahawks, there's a couple matchups. The first thing is that this was a very zone heavy team we saw in week 1 with Seattle. And like we said, they're kind of typically known as like a heavy cover 3 team, but we started to see some, more than just that. Now, I think they've done that in the past well, but some more split coverage looks defensively, definitely rolling into some different coverage looks than just consistently, oh, we're a cover 3 team. Now, they still did do that, especially when you got some single back look. They did mix it. The point is they were very zone heavy. And on the flip side, they were not very successful in a lot of that zone coverage. 262 passing yards were allowed in zone coverage, and a 34.3 coverage grade was given. And the guys that I circled of where you can have success attacking will start there from that safety position. We talked about not having Jamal Adams. Julian Love is a guy that I absolutely circle when you talk about attacking them in zone coverage. I thought there was some missing anticipation. Now, not to say it was terrible all game. I thought it picked up, especially as the game went on. A little bit of slow anticipation on some of the breaking routes that would happen in front of him. You'd see it on cover 6 looks. You see it on cover 3 when they would put him in the action with some of the crossing routes. I thought some little bit late anticipation from him to be just a second late, right? Not be there to actually make a play on the football. He was the guy that I circled in zone coverage. And here's the other key of this. If you're going to play zone coverage and you're not blitzing out of zone, it is crucial that you're getting some type of pressure. And to be honest with you, I kind of walked away from watching that game against the Rams and said, look, I know the Rams, better offensive line, they're healthy, they added Avila to the mix, but I don't necessarily believe that they can get consistent pressure without bringing a blitz. Now, statistically speaking, their pass rush win rate was above average last week, but I just didn't feel that way. I thought Jaron Reed would splash. I thought Darrell Taylor on the edge had some pressure that he could get from time to time. They had some flash moments, but I didn't feel like Stafford was consistently under duress with that front unless they were bringing an extra body. So that's the key there. If you're not going to bring an extra body and you're not getting pressure, you're going to have problems in zone coverage. And the flip side of that is that the Lions, if they're missing Taylor Decker, are really missing a valuable piece. And that is a crucial thing to look at, because where you would think the Lions are going to have tons of success, they're going to be able to sit back there, pass the ball, Goff will have success, they have more weapons than they had last year. No Taylor Decker can really flip that very quickly. They don't have elite proven pass rushers, I would say, on the edge, but they have guys with some good skill sets in Boye Mafe and Darrell Taylor, and what they have with some of the speed that they have on the edge. Another matchup I'm going to circle in this game is the one that we really are kind of just waiting to see, and that is Devin Witherspoon, likely in for Kobe Bryant, I'm thinking. Now, again, they may just push Kobe Bryant around and then, leave Devin Witherspoon in the game. Maybe they kick him to the outside, and then in that case, they could kind of just take one of these outside corners out. But if Witherspoon starts, and I think he'll likely start in that slot position in this game, he is someone that I absolutely circle. Kobe Bryant was a guy that I thought you could really attack specifically in man coverage, and because of that, it's going to be looking at a guy like Devin Witherspoon against whoever is lined up there for for the Lions. You would think Amon-Ra St. Brown. Well, if you think back to last year, we saw that we really couldn't consistently take advantage of that matchup with Kobe Bryant, and I thought a big part of that was because we didn't have St. Brown. You saw a lot of Tom Kennedy, and he had some success, but we couldn't consistently attack that, I think, as much as maybe we would have wanted to against some of those man coverage looks. So this time around, against a debut in Devin Witherspoon, the 5th pick in the draft, versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, whether that's Sam Laporta, whether that's Jahmyr Gibbs in that spot, but a lot of times St. Brown, that is a matchup I absolutely circled just to see who's going to win that battle more often than not in this game. Final matchup that I have to circle is the outside cornerback position with Trey Brown. He was the other guy that I circled and said, look, this is a guy you can attack. He allowed 3 receptions on 4 targets this past week. Michael Jackson came in the game for him later in the game. Trey Brown was someone that I felt like you could kind of go after on the outside. Now, Josh Reynolds was one of those guys that really picked it up for the Lions last week. We said, which guy is going to win that's not named St. Brown, essentially? And Josh Reynolds started to pick it up for the Lions on the outside. But I do look at this because I say with the versatility the Lions have, they can utilize some of their stack looks. They can utilize some of the short motion looks that, for example, the LA Rams did against some of those man coverage looks. You know, we rarely saw man coverage looks from the Seattle Seahawks. You can utilize some of the setups there to try to create matchups or try to create leverage, and they could do that through St. Brown. They could do it through Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, to try to get different matchups on those pieces, and specifically if they can get St. Brown on some of those outside cornerbacks and potentially try to take advantage of that one-on-one, because we know that is the guy that was good against man coverage and good against zone coverage last week consistently, and we know that's what he's about. When they can get those one-on-one matchups and there's no help over top, like we saw at times last week Kansas City tried to utilize, then we know that he can win that more often than not, and Goff's going to look there. And I'm expecting from this game, again, like I said, when we get some of those single back looks, maybe that's I form, we got to go play action. I would expect some cover 3 pretty heavily out of that from the defense side of the ball, especially if they're going to continue to play so much zone coverage. And if that is the case, you got to look for the Lions to set up some of those flood concepts, you know, getting 3 guys on one side of the field. But I think a big part that you circle about that is last year, while the LA Rams, they did some rollouts, they did some bootlegs, they had some success, and they also had some negatives because those edge rushers are so difficult to handle. When you boot out that direction, you have a free edge rusher, they get on you quick, they get on you in a hurry. So will the Lions try to swing out a tight end to lead block? Will the Lions try to keep it inside the pocket, which I thought at times against Seattle they did last year? Keep it inside the pocket. We'll do the play fake, but we're going to keep you inside the pocket to not allow you to be in space with a guy that's just a really good athlete out there that's chasing you down. So I think that's another thing to circle, because I think, again, without having their safety, this is a real opportunity to attack some of those zone coverage looks and find some real zone holes. One thing I will say, though, if you do have no Taylor Decker, for example, and Matt Nelson is in, you could utilize some of those boot looks towards the side of Matt Nelson to almost take him out of the play in the sense of flow it that direction. Maybe you use like a split zone look and you bring a tight end across and he becomes your lead blocker, or maybe you just roll with, again, kind of that naked look and you have a free edge rusher that you try to get to crash down and then quickly hit the flat. We've seen the Lions do something similar where if they're going to use all of the pulling offensive linemen on their run plays, they could try to do the same thing in a pass set by, again, flow it away from that side of, for example, Matt Nelson, whoever the backup tackle is, and use a pulling guard as sort of your lead blocker on those play action sets. And I do trust the Lions offensive line will be pretty good in pass protection, though I do have still some questions without having Taylor Decker. A couple of other things specifically I would point out. Bobby Wagner, specifically with all the zone coverage that they utilize, he's usually playing between the tackles in zone coverage. He is a guy that I saw the Rams have success looking him off in coverage and then coming back and throwing it, buying him in zone. I didn't think the lateral twitch was there for him to have a ton of success at, you know, jumping routes or things like that over the middle of the field. So I thought you had a real ability to throw it by Bobby Wagner. Of course, you have to be disciplined to look him off because he's so vetted that guy's going to jump around if you stare it down. But Goff has shown us that ability to look passes off, find zone windows last week. And if the pass protection is there, I expect that he's going to have some success even going by Bobby Wagner in coverage because I just didn't see the lateral movement. So I think that's why Devin Bush, again, because very crucial for them if they can have him this week for some of those, you know, specifically pass down situations. So look for the Lions to try to utilize some of those wheel routes again in this game. We saw it last time we played Seattle as our first touchdown, and it's because of all the cover 3 looks that they will give you. Of course, you can put them in some communication issue, kind of that underneath flat defender in a tough decision like, oh, do I carry this? And if he just hesitates for a second, now all of a sudden that slot wheel route versus an outside receiver who can kind of get upfield and pull that outside corner with him, now you can have an opportunity to attack that matchup. And again, the key there is going to be pass protection, because if you give the quarterback time to find that, then of course I think we're going to have success attacking those zone holes. And I think you saw that last week when you take a look at the LA Rams, who were 11 for 17 on third down against the Seattle Seahawks in into that game. The quarterback play was good for them. They were not loaded at receiver coming into that game, right? They didn't have Cooper Kupp. A couple young guys stepped up, like Nakua. He stepped up big time for them. Atwell had a couple shots downfield, but I think really you can cause some communication issues. You can cause some rub route issues. I know Ben Johnson schematically is going to get guys in leverage and open up receivers like that, so he's going to stress them, and I think we'll have success against man coverage because of that, because we have some of our pieces back that we didn't have, which is where I circle that matchup of whoever Devin Witherspoon's on and Goff wanting to go there, and then I flip it. If they're going to play so much zone coverage, I anticipate we will have success, but the key to me is going to be 1, pass protection, to 2, allow Goff to find more options downfield, and then again, finding the right scheme to match up to attack that coverage. The flip side of the ball, we got to talk about this Seattle Seahawks offense that went just completely ice cold in the second half, which was weird. I mean, we talk about the additions that they have, JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and it makes a ton of sense to add that piece. When you really look at what this offense is, and you look at the way they're built, and the way they attack, and some of the inefficiencies in terms of an intermediate success that Geno Smith had towards the end of last season, yet he was a top deep ball thrower in the league. He's got a couple of the best deep ball weapons in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, but so much of their offense playing out of that pistol, 2-back, 3-back looks. So much of their offense is utilized with those 2 tight ends. We see it with Disley. We see it with Noah Fant. Last year, Kirby Joseph was beat on the one-on-one against Disley, and he scored the touchdown. I think that was the first touchdown they scored in that game. It's played through those 2, and also the running backs and the speed, the Kenneth Walkers, who can break something to the outside. Now, Zach Charbonnet and adding Jackson Smith and Jigba made so much sense because now they have a really good slot option where they have their 2 outside guys in DK and Lockett, but now you get that slot option to really work off of what you already have with the 2 tight end combo routes that you can run with Disley and Fant, a really good athlete in Fant. Now you throw Jackson Smith and Jigba into that mix, and you're saying, man, they have a ton of weapons to attack the middle of the field. However, last week they went cold. I think you have to start off with the offensive line if you're going to do that because of not having those 2 guys really in the second half and having to go to some of the backups at offensive tackle in Forsyth and also Carhan. I don't think they have a dominant interior offensive line either. It's not bad. It's really not. They have Haynes at right guard, who's a solid right guard from what we've seen so far. They have Evan Brown, the former Lion, who's playing at center, which, look, I didn't think Evan Brown was ever going to be like a great starter, but he was like a mid-level starter, it felt like, when we let him go. So he's a solid center. We know that. He's not, maybe extremely dominant as a run blocker, but he's solid in communication. Left guard, they have Damian Lewis, who was kind of getting destroyed at left guard against Aaron Donald. But the flip side of that is it's understandable because it's Aaron Donald. So, of course, you're going to get beaten. You're going to start with that matchup. So I don't think it's a dominant offensive line by any means. And I think once you took the tackles out of the game, that is a massive issue for this offense, especially when you talk about trying to get number 1, playing from behind, but also number 2, trying to get through multiple reads offensively or play through how it seemed that they wanted to attack this Rams defense, which seemed like we want to attack the edge. We want to get to the D gap. We want to get wide. We want to go right at your edge rushers, which are legitimately unproven. We want to stay away from Donald, and let's get to the edge rushers. Let's block those guys. And they had some real success doing that, which was weird because I didn't see as much as it when I looked back at our game. I think that was more of a specific, hey, we're playing the Rams. Let's get to the edge on these guys. But they also had the capability of breaking anything because a guy like, Kenneth Walker could just go. I mean, he could absolutely just go. So it forced to contain, it forced the pressure on those edge rushers consistently throughout the game. If you think back to last year, Aiden Hutchinson had maybe his best game early in the season. He had 3 run stops against this Seattle Seahawks team, and it's going to be very key that these edge defenders, Dan Campbell talked about Romeo, these edge defenders, I thought Julian even had some success. And I thought there was a couple times we broke down in terms of assignment, but even he had some success, I thought, playing on the edge. So I think we have the bodies to have success, way more success than maybe the LA Rams did, and I don't think they can attack us the same way that they attack the LA Rams because of the personnel that we have at the edge rusher position. There was really some creativity to it. One thing that stuck out to me with the Rams, who played a ton of zone coverage in this game, was when they utilized some of those fast jet motion looks, is that, hey, if you weren't going to follow that, if you weren't going to put an extra guy on that field, if you weren't going to slide off of it, we were just going to utilize that jet motion as a lead blocker, and we'd kick out a lead blocker through the jet motion, and we get wide on the play. We stretch things to the outside. So it is something to keep an eye on, but for us, I think heading into this game, they may look to kind of lean more towards the interior because of what they have healthy. It would understandably make sense. If they try to do what they did last week, I think we'll have more success than the Rams did, and I think we should on paper. But if you take a look at what they have, it wouldn't surprise me if they try to win it more inside in the interior. But this is, again, where I think the Lions should win this battle. To me, the Lions have a better interior defensive front than what I see from their offensive front. With what Aleem McNeil showed us last week, we saw a lot of Benito Jones last time we played this team, and when you're specifically talking about the run, Isaiah Buggs, I think there should be real success for the Lions' ability to handle that in the interior. Now, the challenge is that it all flows to the second and third level, because where Seattle is really tough is they put your linebackers in the action. They're putting those guys in the action consistently, your edge rushers, specifically in coverage, with tight ends, with flats, with rollouts. If you go back to the last time we played this team, really the first 3 completions that Seattle had were against man coverage, and they were man beaters, right? It was Alex Anzalone getting out there late on the flat because he's trying to fill his run lane, and then all of a sudden you have multiple backs coming out of the backfield, and he's late to get to the flat. Then you have Mike Hughes attacked in man coverage, where they kind of switched the release on the play, and all of a sudden he's flipped around and they go right out to the out route. Like, they went at us, and the Lions are playing a lot more man. So this is something I do wonder is, like, are the Lions going to play more man this week than last week? Maybe, but is it going to be like last year, or is it going to be still leaning more into the zone coverage? Because to me, leaning into the zone coverage makes sense this week. I still want to mix it, but I think it makes sense to do that once again. For example, some of the cover 6 looks that we threw at them last season. Now, for us, when they have DK Metcalf, this is smart coverage against this team. You got DK Metcalf, so you can play with a deep safety over top. On the flip side, with Tyler Lockett, you get a little bit more aggressive with your safety. It's a fine idea. The issue for the Lions was pass rush lanes. It really was, because the Lions would have to throw bodies. So if they went man coverage, both safeties a lot of times would double up Lockett and DK Metcalf. Well, the issue with that is you literally have nobody out there when Seattle goes empty like they like to do to watch the quarterback, because the Lions don't play spies. So now there's nobody aside from your 4 defensive linemen that need to keep that quarterback in the pocket. And Geno's not like a consistent runner when you watch him. Even when he takes off, he's not usually gashing you, but he will take off. We saw that last year where I thought our rush lanes could get really ugly. Benito Jones was out there, Aleem was out there. It's going to be key again. Maybe not as much as it was against Kansas City, but when they go empty like they do, if you're in man especially, but even in zone, it's going to be key. The Lions pass rush lanes have to be much better than they were last season against Seattle to keep that quarterback in the pocket. They need to flow better. They need to find the open holes. One thing that I noticed with offensive line, keep running games on the front, right? Like we saw last week, when you have an interior defensive tackle, if your edge rusher has that ability with the two-way go and he goes inside, that DT needs to flow around. But continue to work games on this team, because I did think their offensive line could crack if you continue to work games against this offensive front. Here's what makes Geno Smith tough. He was second in the league last year in yards against the blitz. Who was first? It was Jared Goff. We talked about he did well against the blitz this past season. He recognizes the blitz well. He understands when there's an extra rusher, and he's very quick to get the ball out of his hands. And what does that come down to? A lot of times, it's find DK Metcalf, especially in man coverage. They're going to blitz me. I know he's singled up. There's literally no help. I'm going to trust that my guy's going to win that. And a lot of times, he does win that matchups. So we know that with Geno Smith, if you blitz him, they've had a lot of success at beating the blitz. Flip side, they've had a lot of success at beating man coverage. And a lot of this probably came against us, but an 82.6 passing grade for Geno Smith this past season when attacking man coverage. Again, they have two really good man coverage beaters with what they have in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now you throw JSN into that mix. They have two really good man coverage beaters, so it's hard, which is why I believe the Lions may scale back and go more into the zone look with the personnel that they now have versus what they did last year. And it makes sense for Cam Sutton. I don't want Cam Sutton up there going one-on-one against DK Metcalf without safety help. Now I'm forced to put safety help if I have him one-on-one, and I don't want to consistently do that. So to me, it makes sense to lean more into the zone coverage looks, keep eyes on Geno Smith more often than what we had last year, just because of an entire personnel difference that we have and what we have on the field. They're going to put your linebackers in the action. We saw it last year with a really good play that Malcolm Rodriguez made against a screen that was set up. If you're going to show consistent quarters coverage with early the LA Rams did, then all of a sudden they're going to hit you with that screen, and they're going to challenge that linebacker, one of your 3 underneath linebackers, to get out into the flat and make that tackle. So they're going to challenge you. They're going to play wide slots with your tight ends, with their tight ends. They'll put their back out there. They want to isolate their guy with your linebacker. I think it makes them really tough against man coverage, again, because they have 2 man beaters against the blitz. They also have the ability to really isolate your linebacker against my receiver, and they're going to take that matchup more often than not. So I anticipate we're going to see a lot of Alex, probably Jack Campbell, probably Malcolm Rodriguez again, because he did some flash plays. He had the forced fumble. He had a tight end stop in that game. There was some good, some bad there, but I anticipate we're going to see those 3 guys. So they're going to stress the heck out of those linebackers once again in this week. But it could be a little bit different if we lean into more of the zone coverage look defensively, which then it becomes crucial that the Lions are going to have to find a way to get some pressure. And on on paper, I think it makes sense to believe that the Lions will be able to create more havoc without them having their 2 tackles. If they do that and they can lean in more zone, I think the Lions are in a really good position for this game, because I do believe they're going to be able to stop the run and force bounces to the outside with what they have on the interior. And then it just comes down to those edge rushers really holding and setting the edge and being consistent in playing that contained role. But to me, I think if the Lions can get that pressure, they can lean a little bit more into that zone coverage, and I think on paper it should lead to some success. Positions that I would circle defensively, like I said, the edge rushers, mainly for the run defense. What they utilize, the way that they attack the edge of the field, that's something that I would absolutely circle, because we're going to be tested there. I would also check on the linebackers, specifically in coverage. Now, the big part of this is all the boot, it's all the rollout, it's all the play action, it's the 3 backs they put in the backfield out of a pistol look, and it's very quick to it because they're in pistol. He doesn't have to take 7 steps to get it to the running back. It's very quick in the ball carrier's hand, and he's taken off. So the stress that they place on the linebackers is real, which ultimately to me transfers into that slot cornerback role, which last year was Mike Hughes. Whether that's asking him to come down and play run fits, or it's asking him in coverage, like we saw last year with some breakdowns with Mike Hughes playing in that role, I circle Brian Branch, because Brian Branch is probably going to see some Jackson Smith and Jigba in this game, not just because of that matchup, but because of his responsibilities that will likely be out there. And I will quickly say this, if the Lions are playing cover 6 or quarters like they did last time they played them, and it's a good coverage against this team, or like the Rams did, focus on that player, whether that's quarters, the 2 safeties, or in cover 6, that player's on the quarters side that is able to get a little bit more aggressive, whether that's a play action crossing route that he needs to step in front of, or that's a situation where they spread us out and they put DK in the slot that needs to be aggressive on that backside to really be instinctually sound, because that is the player that we need to step up and make some of those plays, where last year I felt like the coverage was fine, but we weren't stepping into those spots. We were maybe giving just a little bit too much cushion or a little bit too much depth. Yeah, we're seeing the quarters looks, we're seeing the cover 6 like we saw last year. Those underneath guys are going to be stressed, because those are the guys, whether that's Brian Branch that's in the sub package or it's your off-ball linebackers, those are the guys that are going to have to cover a lot of ground. Those are the guys that have to worry about the run fakes. Those are the players that have to going to take away those tight ends, where they try to hit you with quick hitters consistently. They're trying to get it right to the tight end's hands and move. It's a quick pace. Let's get the ball in the hands and let's continue. That's how they do things offensively. So that's going to be a real challenge for us in this game, and those linebackers are going to be circled. I think this is going to be a key as well, because while Geno won't go crazy rushing the football, he will take what you give him. And if the emphasis has to kind of trend into, okay, we really got to focus on DK because we're struggling with DK and Tyler Lockett, if that's fine, but if that happens, the rush lanes are going to be even more emphasized defensively. I think it's going to be fun, because if you think back to last year, we didn't have Jerry Jacobs or Cam Sutton in this game. We didn't have those 2 guys heading into this matchup. And I understand they're not the pure press, cornerback, specifically Sutton, but those are guys that can play in off coverage well. They're patient in coverage. It just feels like we have 2 solid, reliable corners. If you remember back to last year with all the man coverage, Jeff Okudah allowed 5 receptions on 6 targets for 124 yards, I believe it was. That's a problem. And again, that's why we had to surrender so much help, because we wanted to lean into man. But on the flip side of leaning into man, now all of a sudden, rush lanes can be compromised if you're throwing extra bodies. And if you can't win on one, now I have to send you help. And without having, I thought, 2 reliable outside cornerbacks where you could trust them a little bit more without having to double team, I thought that led to an exposed issues all across the board for the Lions. They also had some schematic run defensive breakdowns, so it's something I would keep an eye on. You think about the touchdown that they had where they pulled an offensive lineman, the Lions just had nobody in the gap after getting the same look the play before when it did not count. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, because Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, specifically Walker though, he's a game breaker. I mean, you can clean it up in the middle and he'll bounce and then he's gone. That guy can absolutely run. So he's a game breaker at running back that has to be kind of dialed in on. And I think if this is a team that they're not going to do extremely well from playing from behind. I don't think they want to live in that world of playing from behind where they have to get past living underneath through some of their tight ends and backs. They're going to want to push the ball where Geno Smith is a really good deep ball passer, but that sets up through everything else and what they can create. I don't think they want to be in that spot where we can play with 2 deep safeties consistently coming into the down and rush our passes against them. I don't think that's the spot we want to be in. So if the Lions can jump on a lead early, I think they're going to be in a heck of a position for the rest of the game. Saw last week, Seattle Seahawks 22% conversion rate on 3rd down. I can't believe this number is real. Geno Smith was 2 of 7 for 15 yards in the second half. That's unreal without having their tackles in the game. So to me, like I said, I think it's going to be key. You get up on this team, you can get a lead, and then I think you're in a really good spot going forward. for this game, those are the players that I'm circling. The key players, like the players I think could have a huge game. I'm circling the tight end position. TJ Hockenson went crazy last time we played Seattle. He had a massive game. One of them was run after catch. But because of what they do defensively, especially if they start to lean a little bit more man, trying to find those matchups, I look at Laporta being split out wide, put in the slot. He was a guy that we went to versus some of their cornerbacks, which some of them are a little bit on the smaller side, like Trey Brown. Witherspoon isn't the biggest guy either. So I would circle a guy like Laporta where they could look for that size matchup, run some of those spot routes that we saw last year when we played the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, they have Reek Woolen, who's a big cornerback, but we've seen guys be able to separate. Specifically, he's super fast, but a Khalif Raymond in that matchup, I really like that idea. So that's someone that I would like to see Lions try to get into that mix a little bit. If you think back to last year, we saw a lot of Khalif Raymond at the running back position against Seattle. We put him in a lot of our offset gun looks, and we look to get him the ball in the backfield, use him as a decoy without some of our weapons. So I think St. Brown will be the key from the slot, but we did use Khalif in a lot of creative ways, and I could see that happening again. So those are really the two guys that I circle offensively, or the three guys: Laporta, St. Brown, Khalif Raymond. I think just in some of the ways that we could try to utilize him this week to throw some things off. But again, I expect the running game's going to have some real success, and that we can lean on that a little bit more efficiency than last week, but maybe more consistency overall as a whole in terms of rushing the football, and a lot of versatility could come out of this week. And then on the flip side, defensively, I talked about the players that I would focus on. I think for the Lions, getting pressure is going to be key. If the Lions can beat these tackles and overwhelm this offensive line, you can get them in a spot where I think they're moved back. This is kind of an interesting one to predict because I do feel like there's some real unknowns here. Like, what is the strategy with the offensive line? Part of me kind of just wants them to, slide over Big V to right tackle and put Penei Sewell at left tackle. Because then if Graham Glasgow starts and you're saying, well, who's the backup to that? Well, of course you have Colby Sorstel. So now you have a legitimate interior backup offensive lineman that can move around. To me, that would make a ton of sense. And also on the practice squad, we have an interior offensive lineman that we took a look at in one of our videos a few weeks before this, or a week before the season, a few weeks ago, that can play literally both guard positions and center. So he could be elevated for even more depth if you wanted to do something like that. But I don't know what they're going to do there. That's a real question, and how the Lions can maybe try to hide it. Of course, if you can stay in front in this game, if you can stay on top of the chains, you can hide it through play action, utilizing a tight end to help block. Like, you can hide a little bit more than having to drop back and pass. I don't think they have a proven elite pass rusher or edge rusher on either side, so you may not have to have too many issues with that, but communication will also pop into play as well. We know we didn't have Taylor Decker. It literally changed our entire team. It changed how we play offense. It changed everything about the Lions. We didn't have Decker. So that can't be overlooked as like, oh, we don't have Decker. It was insanely huge. And we've talked about it so much about Lions need to address this. They need to address it. They kind of did with Jermaine Ifedi, and then they let go of Jermaine Ifedi. And then, of course, they signed Obina Eze, and now Obina Eze is not here anymore. So they didn't really address it. The only thing would be the development of Matt Nelson. And I think after a rough week one, I would say the preseason, he bounced back and he was solid. He moved to left tackle. He was solid for us in the last couple of preseason games, but it is a real question mark. And that's going to be the biggest question mark. So for me, I do think that this is a game that the Lions can get ahead and win. Part of me wants to kind of knock a couple of points off without having our offensive line healthy. But truly, I'm going in with a confident prediction. I'm going 27-17. The Lions take care of business at home. I kind of wanted to knock it down, make it like 24-20 just because not having the offensive line, or 24-17. But I'm going to go with a confident 27-17. 27-17, the Lions win this game. They get control. They run really well. Gibbs and Montgomery, maybe more Gibbs this week, specifically in the run game. And I think Monty has a big game. I think they run the ball well. I think they stop the run, and hopefully they play with the lead for a lot of this. I know this is an optimistic prediction, so you're like, wait a minute, don't be doing this. We won one game, but this is what I think after watching them play. But it's so early that it is very difficult. It's kind of like Kansas City. You kind of don't know exactly where you're going to get. It's only been 1 week, so it's difficult, but that's my prediction. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Give me your prediction. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.